OTAs are continuing for the Miami Dolphins, and Mike McDaniel spoke on Tua Tagovailoa. Several players talked about the value of reps this time of year, and a fan favorite free agent has signed elsewhere. All that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. OTAs continuing this week. Mike McDaniel, press availability on Tuesday. Heard about Tua Tagovailoa. Saw a highlight play from Tua Tagovailoa and Taj Washington. Heard from several players, including Nick Needham and Durham Smythe and Liam Eichenberg, about the value of reps. We're going to talk about all of that here today, plus one fan favorite free agent at the spot that everybody loves to ask about, offensive line. He signed elsewhere this morning. We're going to talk about that. Let's start with Mike McDaniel, though, because Tua Tagovailoa going into year 5, and the big questions that exist is with his strengths and weaknesses as a player. If the Dolphins are going to be able to get over the hump. He's working with John Beck and Tom House's 3D QB conglomerates as far as trying to train this offseason. What is the objective that you're trying to achieve there? There's been some discourse about the weight management as far as he came in leaner this year than he did last year after he played all 17 games. Mike kind of touched on a lot of it, and I thought it was pretty helpful. So the first thing that kind of caught my eye, and it caught my eye because it directly addresses, if you guys think back to February, I think it was February, we kind of did like a debrief of the season and specifically the offense. And we looked at 5 variables. We looked at coaching, we looked at offensive line injuries, we looked at the supporting cast of players, we looked at Tua Tagovailoa himself, and we kind of just asked the question, what was the biggest failure for each one of these individual variables? Because in reality, the variables was a compounding of several variables altogether at the end of the season. And the big thing for Tua was throws that required you to attack outside the numbers and drive throws down the field, not check downs, not swings, not short hitches at 5 yards at depth, whether that's to the field or the boundary, but throws that require you to drive a far distance, but are not necessarily vertical shots down the field. A lot of Miami's success passing the ball vertically comes from in rhythm, shotgun 3-step shots down the field, or looks from the fade where the split is a little bit more condensed, and then you can get up and stack somebody up over the top. And that's obviously all dependent on coverage shell and pre-snap look and what kind of coverage you get specifically and all that kind of stuff. But I think back to the 2-minute offense situation against Buffalo is a nice example of, and Tua's made some of these throws, but they're usually in rhythm and within the designed timing of the play. But the shot that he took to Tyreek on the play before the intersection, where the ball couldn't quite beat the defender kind of gets there at the same time, and the pass gets broken up because Tyreek gets hit, but then he takes a big hit. So then he goes go off the field, and you got he who shall not be named running routes that end up in interceptions in Week 18 at home. Obviously, super unfortunate turn of events. The point being, driving those throws was teams daring you at times to do some of that with the really good defenses that you played. And if you don't have the personnel to do it, it doesn't really matter. Miami will take what they want anyway. But the well-coached teams that have high-end talent, the teams that gave Miami some challenges last year, the way that they structured their coverage a lot of times was daring you to make outside of timing tight window throws to the field or outside the numbers. And that hasn't necessarily been a strength of this offense. Mike McDaniel was asked, have you seen a difference in Tua Tagovailoa? And his response was, I think without thinking, he has probably generated a little bit more force on some throws that he's trying to drive. I like hearing things like this because that is, for me, you're never going to totally overhaul your arm and become a much more raw, powerful thrower. And Tua's got sufficient level arm strength, right? He's got a lot of qualities that are things he can hang his hat on. Raw, pure, unbridled arm strength is probably never going to be one of them. But if you can really clean up the biomechanics of your throwing release, you can get a little bit more rotational power. Joe Burrow did this after his rookie season as an example of a quarterback recently who didn't have the strongest arm, but then kind of went to work on his delivery, went to work on how he threw the football, and found a little bit of extra RPM and just kick it up a little extra gear. And it was helpful for Joe Burrow. There's no reason to think it wouldn't be helpful for Tua Tagovailoa, especially if teams dare you to hit some of those throws to get you out of what they're doing. If you hit a few with consistency, that changes the game a little bit. And it's not to say it's guaranteed that it's going to happen, but to hear Mike McDaniel immediately allude to, I think subconsciously he's getting a little bit more force on some throws that he has to drive. That's a win. Mike McDaniel also said this, I actually have extensive experience with the coach that he's working with, John Beck. I was a coach in 2011 for the Washington team that he quarterbacked and have been on a couple of teams where he's worked with some of the quarterbacks that we already have. So there's some familiarity with that, which is awesome because with John, he knows what we're trying to do in the direction or how we might ask a quarterback to play. I think that connectivity to your game and trying to unearth every single inch and iota of professional development, that in itself, you're headed in the right direction. That's a really promising start. Mike also alluded to as far as like Tua Tagovailoa and playing weight watch. Mike said there was a misconception as far as the objective from last offseason, which was not necessarily to get bigger, it was to get stronger. And kind of what's been alluded to is this foundational strength was added last year, and now maintaining the strength and changing the body composition so that you can have a little bit more mobility is kind of what the expected goals and objectives are. Now, we heard from more than just Mike McDaniel. We heard from Nick Needham, we heard from Liam Eichenberg, we heard from Durham Smythe, heard from all those guys. And we're going to dive into them next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins and what they had to say. Stick with us. It is winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. How about those Cats, baby? Tying up the Eastern Conference Finals, 2-2 going back to Madison Square Garden. FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. I thought the Nick Needham stuff was cool because Nick Needham, he talked about working at safety and corner and the combination of that. And he also was asked about kind of the frame of mind this year versus last year when he was recovering from the injury that he had, the Achilles tear from 2022. But what really popped to me was Jordan Poyer, who Nick was asked about, and was asked about Poyer coming from Buffalo into Miami, what Jordan did to kind of get himself connected with his teammates. Apparently, Jordan Poyer had a big all-defensive backs dinner over at his house and hosted everybody over at his house to kind of familiarize himself and get to know everybody and just kind of start that conversation. And for a veteran player in Jordan Poyer to come into the mix, especially from a divisional rival, and to be that connected and outgoing with his teammates, I think is a really cool nugget courtesy of Nick Needham. And I know from some of the folks that I've talked to that have seen some of the open practices to the media, there's no open practices to the public yet. You got to wait till training camp for that. One of the things that has been a consensus bit of feedback was that Jordan Poyer and Javon Holland And their line of communication throughout practice is very dynamic. It's very active. That's obviously necessary. You have to be that way as you're passing off assignments based on route leverages and who's running where. And if you can cut the deep cross and I'll flip with you and I'll rotate back and I'll take your deep responsibility. But all of that, you got to be on the same page. Because if you're not and both guys drive on the under, that's how you give up the explosive plays for touchdowns. And if you're kind of caught in between, did he hear me? Is he going to go with him? Is he not? Then you get big gouging chunks over the middle of the field, right? It's just a simple embodiment of it. But hearing Nick Needham, who has kind of been on this up and down journey with Miami, exciting start, kind of felt like he found himself a nice role, comes back with the team last year, suffers the injury in week 6. It was against Minnesota in 2022. And trying to get back from that last year, missing the first half of the season. Like it's been a trying time. And to hear Nick talk about where he's at, but then also to hear about the effort from the entire defensive back room and Jordan Poyer's role in that, I thought was really, really cool. Liam Eichenberg was asked about what position was second nature to him, which I thought was funny because you consider Liam's journey and his rookie year, he's a tackle. And then he was a guard, and now he's a center, and now he's kind of back and forth in between. He's taken some team stuff at center during OTAs. But Liam kind of left no bones about it as far as where he is long term. He said, that he jumped in at center based off of the needs of Aaron Brewer working with the trainers during this time of year. But he said when Aaron Brewer gets back, hopefully settle in at guard. He did say not playing tackle is second nature, like the stuff on the inside, but being able to flip back and forth between guard and center is a bit of a seamless transition. He pointed out that he's familiar with the offense, that he knows how to point things. And if you're familiar with this scheme, whether that's the run game or protection, getting your points, which is like pointing what direction the offensive line is working to, who's the mic, because that's where the center is going to push that direction. And that's the responsibility for the back in the backfield. If you're going 6-man protection, and the back's got to know where the center's going and where they are identifying the mic to work that direction, because the back's got to set his responsibilities off of eliminating what player they're identifying as the mic and the center's working to. As just an individual example of how there's interconnectivity between certain elements that all runs through the center, right? So for Liam to say that familiarity that exists there, and that when Brewer is back and working in the team setting, him being at guard and hoping to help Brewer optimize his onboarding and application of the scheme, I appreciate that insight from players. I appreciate hearing players that are teammate oriented, like Jordan Poyer having everybody over to his house, or Liam saying, look, I know how to do it because I had to do it last year and we've been in the scheme. This is year 3 in the scheme. But when Brewer's back and I'm back over at guard and not working at center like I am right now, looking forward to helping Brewer with that onboarding process for him as well. So things like that this time of year, as everybody's trying to get back together, everybody's trying to get on the same page, but then you have certain players that are not participating for whether it's workload management perspective or contract holdouts or whatever it is. Maybe they're doing their own individual training. Maybe they're traveling to their own individual training that happens out of state, like whatever the reason may be, right? Hearing that collaborative approach, knowing that's a part of the culture that this team has thirsted for and chased since moving on from Brian Flores back in 2021. And the decision to move on was we wanted a more collaborative football operation. Well, now you're getting some instances of collaboration within the player ranks, and that culture trickling down from the top down is a nice reinforcement of what this team is trying to do. And with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Odell Beckham not participating, You also have a reps opportunity that is a really great opportunity for a lot of young guys like Taj Washington, who made the big play at the end of practice, guys like Eric Ezukama, who sounds like he is splashing on a daily basis, as the eyeballs that I have talked to have indicated. Guys like Malik Washington, who sounds like he's had some strong practices as well. Those guys, particularly if Tua Tagovailoa is throwing, Jody Fortson, young guy, but lack of experience, been in the league a few years, new to this team. Players like that and their participation and getting on the same page with Tua, given that Tua is indeed here, despite the reports that he was holding out, missing all the time or whatever. The point is he's here now. And collecting all of those reps with your starting quarterback, you think about some of the misfires that you had with Chase Claypool last year, right? He who shall not be named. Came in at the trade deadline, didn't get any of the work this time of year. It's a timing-based offense. It's a trust-based offense for the quarterback and the receivers and understanding the leverage and being in the right spot and the ball's going to be there for you. These reps are meaningful. They certainly are. And you're starting to see some instances of players who are taking advantage of the opportunities that they have here at the end of May. And I think that's great. One thing that's maybe not great for some fans is one name that many have pointed to as a potential Dolphins ad is off the board in free agency as of this morning. We're going to talk about that next. Stick with us. I appreciated the talking point versus the feedback on yesterday's show, which was the UDFA show. And I went through all the UDFAs and I pointed out, here's where opportunities exist, specifically in the offensive line. I'm a little apprehensive about saying any of these guys are going to make the team because you're concerned about the top end talent, but you really have probably 11 guys that are going to be on 53-man rosters and nobody carries 11 offensive linemen. And there's a lot of positional interchangeability with this group. So don't think it's going to happen. And all the comments for which UDFAs had the best chance to make the roster? Any offensive lineman. Who are the best offensive linemen? The obsession continues. And I get it. I genuinely get it. I do think the process of assembling and feeling good about your investments and having a high hit rate on the offensive line, it's a lot harder, case in point with how hard it's been for Miami to do it than we want it to be. It's a lot harder than we want it to be. For some fans, Dalton Risner had been pegged as a solution to the Dolphins' issues. I didn't think that was the case. And it doesn't matter because he's off the board now. He's re-signed on a one-year deal with Minnesota this morning on Wednesday, May 29th. To which I say, okay, see you later. And there are a couple reasons why. When I graded Dalton Risner for this scheme with the anticipation of what this scheme is and the importance of foot speed and explosiveness off the line and be able to get out of your stance, a lot of the same questions that I have with Liam Eichenberg with his ceiling in the scheme, a lot of the same questions that I have with Rob Jones as far as what he can be at his best in this scheme. Those same dynamics exist for Dalton Risner. A lot of plays where I thought the feet were left behind. The feet were the least reactive part of his game at times. Center of gravity struggled as a result. And there's plays where he's on the ground when the point of attack gets strung out. And that's a big contrast to what at its core this offense is supposed to be and what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to be guys out in space and getting up on the second level and horizontal flow and exploding out of the blocks and creating stretch and allowing the back to make the read on the MA line of scrimmage. Am I going to take the edge? No. Okay, I'm going to work back inside, gap by gap, until I find a crease. And if the left guard's on his rear end and on his caboose because he can't keep his feet because his feet are too slow to keep up with the flow, guess what? You're going to get tackled in the backfield. And I thought that was kind of the case with Dalton Risner. Plus, he was a left guard exclusive player to this point in his career. I don't think that really fits what you need a right guard. You need to replace Robert Hunt. So I was a little surprised to see that a signing came through today just because you are so close to the June 1st dollars opening up for some teams across the league where you think theoretically it's going to open up some more spending power for teams where maybe players would hold out and see if they can get a little extra coin as a result. But Dalton Risner's off the board in free agency. Back to Minnesota. I am personally incapable of caring any less that he's off the board. I would put him in the same tier and bucket as Robert Jones and Liam Eichenberg as far as caliber of offensive linemen for this team. There are a few that I would be interested in your pursuits in. The number one on that list is Greg Van Roten. Played with the Raiders last year. We did a dive on him a few weeks ago. That's a player I'm still very much like hot on the trail of. I think if you add that player, I think it changes the dynamic of the offensive line because it kicks everybody down. It pencils him in as amongst your starting five. I think he'd be one of your best 5 offensive linemen. And the domino effect, because the Dolphins do have numbers of rosterable players, you just don't feel like they have 5 starting caliber guys right now. That I think would change, at least short term, until somebody's not healthy. Depending on who you have who can play what spots, maybe it stays that way. On your offensive line. And I know everybody wants it resolved. I want it resolved too. I want to make sure it is right. I want to make sure it stays healthy as much as it can this year, which it did not do last year. But Dalton Risner is not going to be part of the solution, and I'm totally fine with that. And I know because I know how social media works, and the voices get loud, and a lot of fans who just know that they want the offensive line to be better, and they hear Dalton Risner 20,000 times over the course of the past 3 months, mentioned in tweets and posts and TikToks and Instagram reels and all the things, that I want to get this guy on the roster. This guy's got to sign with the Dolphins. And then he leaves. He say, oh, blown opportunity. We dropped the ball. I don't think we did. I'm going to be honest. But that's just my 2 cents. That is going to do it for us here today on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. I appreciate you guys checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your hump day here today on Wednesday, May 29th. We will be back again tomorrow. More Dolphins content coming your way. Hope to see you then. Fins up.